Hi, I'm Jake Kouns, CEO of Risk-Based Security. Welcome to this edition of The Right Security, the show which we spend time talking with leaders and veterans in the security space, tackling the issues of the day. Today, I'm joined by Dan Holden. If you look at his LinkedIn profile, he says he's an Infosec veteran and he's an advocate for the plight of the CISO. Dan has more than 25 years experience across all kinds of cybersecurity domains. He's a recognized expert. He actually has held leadership positions at companies, including the retail and hospitality RVAsec, Arbor Networks, Tipping Point, among others. When he was chief technology strategist with Arbor, he worked on a lot of new technology for them, drove some innovation, and focused quite a bit on highlighting denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks around the world. When he was at IBM, ISS, I believe in X-Force, oversaw creation of a lot of content, security content and products. But Dan and I first met each other, I believe, when he was at HP Tipping Point, and we crossed our paths in some vulnerability work. I really think, Dan, of you in many ways as sort of this jack of all trades. Not saying that you're master of none, don't take it that way, but you've got a lot of insights on a lot of different things and when it comes with security. But I think right now the most things is really you're helping companies with security management and leadership. I must say, I dressed up for you today because I thought you were going to have a jacket and a tie and even a pocket square. So I'm a little surprised that you don't have a jacket, but why don't we talk about a little bit of security management stuff today? Does that seem like a fair enough for you?
Yeah, I think maybe it's the transformation from the vendor side to the practitioner side, but I didn't want to disappoint you, so we will transform so that you are more comfortable with the imagery, Jake. So
I feel much better now.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Now that you are actually in a spot that makes sense, why don't we dive in? Let's dive in and let's go with the age-old debate. Do you have to be technical to manage and lead security teams?
Always a fun question because we've been, debating it for 2 decades probably. I think if you're managing a technical team, then yeah, it helps, right? I mean, if you're managing, digital forensics, incident response, reverse engineering, that sort of thing, it helps drastically. I would say, there's been a lot of debate over the last few years as it pertains to CISOs. And I think as the conclusion I've come to is the point at which we are at as an industry, good chunks of the CISOs that I have seen, both, to level, varying degrees of success, let's say. What I would suggest is that folks definitely have some kind of operational background. So in other words, folks that have, I would almost say for a CISO, having some level of development background or engineering management background is just really, I think really gives an edge. Mainly because security organizations are generally speaking larger than they used to be. You've got security organizations that are as large, or if not larger than, some vendors, engineering teams. And so anyway, I say all that to say that the operational efficiency, the operational metrics are incredibly important. I see a lot of security programs that focus on technical metrics and, the metrics that are coming out of their security controls rather than their security practice, let's say. So anyway, my response is kind of beating around the bush, but I would say in terms of upper management leadership positions, I think you're a whole lot better off having, let's say, been the VP of engineering than, having a decade of consulting behind you. It's just, you're managing very different things. And the resources that you're managing are really the program, not the technology. So that's been my experience.
I think that makes a lot of sense. You get some people on one side that say, if you can't code, you don't know anything about security. And then you get some people on the other far side that say, hey, look, I can manage anything. I think the answer, like most things in life is there's somewhere in the middle that is, where things are just quite right. If you have some expertise in the technical space, it'll help you. If you don't, finding someone as part of the team that can help and work with you seems like it's a really smart thing. So, okay. Another thing
Actually,
that
I can give you an,
I think we have talked about. Go ahead.
I was going to give you an example, right? Because a lot of this Q&A can be very fluffy and nebulous. To your point, I think regardless, the CISO or the number two, if you will, someone has got to be able to translate both the security and the technology. Frankly, generally that's the CISO, right? I mean, people have been talking about the board needs someone that knows security. I don't know that that's the case. If the board needs someone that knows security, then I would say it's a failure of the CISO not being able to explain the security program to the board. So I think that skill set is critical. Being able to translate something that is complex or technical, that skill set is very important. But specific to this, think about AppSec. If you are running a large AppSec program, of which so many programs are these days, a good chunk of your security program is AppSec. Think of the many SaaS-based companies. The majority of companies, right, are software houses, regardless of whether they're retailers or financials or whatever the case might be, right? They are pumping out huge amounts of software. If you fundamentally do not understand the development lifecycle, how security is important to the day-to-day and how to manage unplanned work, then you're going to have a tough time, right? If the attitude of security is to just throw a bunch of findings over the wall and not understand how the other team actually interacts with those, that can be a tough position. My motto is, any finding or ask of a software development organization, you should be able to give them the same quality of information that they produce and receive themselves, right? Security to a large degree is an aspect of QA for software development. And if you don't understand that process, do you need to know assembly? No. Do you need to understand, modern development? Very much. So that would kind of be my modern take on that old question.
All right, makes sense. So one of the things I've said a lot to people is that unfortunately, if you talk to 10 different security professionals, 10 different CISOs, you're going to get 10 different answers about what the most important thing is to work on when it comes to security. What's your thoughts right now on how to best advise companies when they're trying to prioritize all of these security issues?
I like that because I think that's a big problem with security. The fact that everyone has a different answer is bad. That shows, even though we've come a long way in, the last 20, 25 years, the fact that we're still so nebulous on the core fundamentals is bothersome. I like to break it down to just three simplistic things. Again, if you're playing CISO, what should matter to you, or what matters to the business, what matters to the CEO, what matters to the board. And it's the same things that matter to us as individuals, whether you're looking at risk, and I hate to bring up tired old analogies, but they're used for a reason, right? Whether it's your car, your house, and you're very familiar with cyber insurance, Jake. Fundamentally, you're asking very similar questions as you are the most important assets in your life. What are we protecting? How much is it costing us? And to what level is it protected to? And those sound very simplistic, but as we all know with security, a lot of times that just is bypassed, right? I mean, people are still very much, stuck in a framework mindset, an audit compliance mindset. We think of the check boxes, we think of, the things that are typical to security. But I think that's exactly what's been holding us back. We shouldn't be thinking any different than the rest of the business. We shouldn't be thinking or talking any different than a sales organization, an engineering organization, a marketing organization. The terminology and the fundamental business drivers should very much be the same.
All right, Dan. So what are your thoughts about how to really get a business to engage and really support security initiatives? Right now, sort of a crazy time as we've talked about, but it's easy for companies to say we care about security. But what's been your experience on how to get them really involved and truly to support what security needs to get done?
I'm going to try and stay to 2 points. There's the classics, right? Time proven. You've seen this debate many times, Jake. Everybody talking about the value of FUD. I think most people would say, listen, if FUD didn't work, then sales and marketing folks it would stop using it. But to a great extent, it does work. And if nothing else, it provides some real world examples, right? Whether that's data breaches or whether that's a particular, campaign, malware, botnet vulnerability, whatever the case might be. So that classic, we're going to get a pen test and scare everybody, depending on the business, depending on the organization, that might still work. And if it does, great. I think for more mature organizations, it is and should be far more business driven. So if you are about to IPO, there's certainly been many companies that have been caught off guard, after the fact. And so, learn the lessons from the previous folks. I when my daughter was younger and she was growing up, I would tell her, people that make mistakes and don't learn from them, avoid that, right? Learn from your mistakes. That's smart. But if you're a genius, you learn from others' mistakes. And in security, I think that's why FUD has always been an aspect, right? We are trying to learn from others' mistakes, and security is full of those stories. But as I think any CISO will tell you, risk is the language of business. And so really, you've got to be talking in outside of just the normal stuff, like I said, compliance and enabling the business, that sort of thing. I think you've got to be able to communicate in not just risk, because everyone says that, but I like to talk about impact. Most folks, I think, tend to talk about likelihood. Likelihood for me is always scary because we've seen some amazing, unreal things in this industry. I mean, who would have predicted we'd still be seeing, very serious bugs in, Windows kernels or DNS or, crypto, and those things, still crop up. We're always amazed that such, kind of time-proven software still has vulns. So I like to talk about potential impact because you never know if you're going to have some kind of, black swan type event. And I think some of the biggest breaches in history, if the business had understood the potential impact of being hit rather than the likelihood, perhaps they would have acted differently. So I think having that risk conversation, risk profile, people need to understand not just the art of the possible, but if something does happen, really, what does that do to our business? And if you go back 10 years, there's a slew of those examples where nobody thought the likelihood of their intellectual property being ripped off and the company going down the tubes was a reality, but we saw that it absolutely was. So they might have thought the likelihood was low, but they obviously did not understand the impact.
So at RVAsec in 2019, which was only just last year, but it feels like much longer, you gave a talk called the CISO of 2025, and we'll add a link into the notes here so folks can go take a listen and watch that talk. And you actually started with a Sun Tzu quote. Nah, I'm only kidding. But you did start with a quote that basically talked about how I think auditors, it's a problem when they can't distinguish between what work matters to the business and what work doesn't. And I think that's how you started off, and you went through a pretty nice talk. Can you give us a quick sort of recap, cliff notes of that talk, of those key points that you were trying to make in that talk at RVAsec?
Yeah, actually, what I was quoting and did so several times throughout that presentation was the Phoenix Project. I don't know, published 5 years ago. I don't know at this point. But it's near and dear to my heart, the DevOps revolution, primarily because I think it is opening up a huge window of opportunity for security. We've heard the same things, again for decades. Why can't security be baked in, or why is security always bolted on? And here we have, as an industry, one of the probably the greatest opportunity we've ever had outside of compliance, which is forceful. The DevOps revolution has not only sped things up, but it's changed the mindset of people, right? The way in which we tie work together, the way in which we understand differing work, the way we obviously manage that. And so if you want to bake in security, literally, the development process is where, for 20 years we've been saying it needed to be, rather than after the fact. Well, here's our chance. And so, as a part of that talk, I was saying, it kind of goes back to, what I mentioned earlier with CISOs. If you don't understand the development process, if you've never managed a project that was, a development project where you were not implementing something, but building something, and there's a huge difference, then I think you're really missing the boat. I think you're missing the boat on the opportunity. Security is not at a place right now where we need to buy more things or implement or plug in new stuff. We're really at a place where it's not about the technology. It is about the people and the process. And so if it's about the people and process more so than the technology than ever before, and I'm talking, speaking relatively here, then that DevOps revolution is a huge opportunity, and I think that's where a lot of CISOs should be spending their mental effort, so to speak, in terms of figuring out how to get plugged in. And again, security should be treated as QA. A security bug is the same thing as a feature bug, not in terms of priority, but in terms of how that should be managed in the process. That's the way both security and I think development should be thinking. That's a DevOps sort of reality. Security isn't this nebulous or bad folks, being draconian or just throwing a zillion findings over the fence. That if we have no other place to integrate, certainly we have a chance to integrate there. And so I think, as folks have said before, right? You can't boil the ocean, especially with security. Be good at one thing. What is most critical? And if the most critical thing that your company does is online, is, let's say, a website, whether you're commerce or SaaS or whatever the case might be, it seems like a pretty good area of prioritization and risk reduction to me.
Yeah, no, I love the relationship of quality to security. And in fact, even when we founded Risk-Based Security, we were talking about, if you think about TQM, total quality management, and you just replace the quality with security, right? Total security management, the same sort of TQM concepts, they apply so much to the security industry. It's crazy. But look, we're now almost at the end of 2020, which is probably a good thing. I guess we're almost 2 years closer to 2025. We've had unforecasted, I guess, COVID pressures, budget pressures, staffing pressures. If you had to give that talk again, are you going to still say the same thing? Have some things changed about what you think the CISO of 2025 is?
Wow. Well, you might have stumped me on that one. No, I think fundamentally it's probably the same. Although, it's great if anyone watches that presentation and feels differently, they can let us know. No, I mean, there were some key things I was trying to hit on there. One of them certainly was the opportunity of the DevOps revolution. There were a couple other things, understanding the difference between, risk and security and protection. There's a big difference between those three things. And I would say that, again, the ability to translate is really what's so important. And I would say any CISO or aspiring CISO, having that ability to to be able to speak that language of the business, which I know everyone says, but just because you say it doesn't mean you know how to do it. I mean, just Google. I mean, look up. How many presentations or papers or books are written on the topic of presenting to the board or what that material might look like, and it's really small. And I think that's something for vendors to think about as well. So many of these startups have a board they have to report to. How come they're not thinking about the way their products work, the way their products report, the way their products extend security language to the practitioners? I think that is a huge vacuum in the industry right now, and so it's something I think both the practitioners and vendors should be worrying about and concerned with. And you're seeing that. I mean, you see way more startups around not AI and machine learning and more red blinking lights, but things having to do with business and security functions, third party. How do we track what we do? I mean, that sounds so simplistic, right? But again, every other aspect of the business, sales, engineering, marketing, they all know how to track and measure and understand what they're doing. And you'd be blown away, surprised, by how many security programs just aren't there. And the majority of security programs truly are run via, spreadsheets. So a big part of that talk was, my point was, think differently from traditional security folks, but think very similarly to the functions that already exist in business, right? We're not special. We're not all that different. It's not 20 years ago. My point is that it's kind of time to grow up and act like the rest of the business so we can be treated like the rest of the business.
So, if someone's, watched that RVAsec talk, or they're listening to you now and they say, Dan, this is great and all, but we're not a massive company. We're not megacorp. We can't afford a CISO. Even if we could afford one, we can't find that one that would come and even want to work for us. You've had wide experience from small to large companies trying to help them. What do you say to those folks that say that to you, that they're just not the megacorp and you're just talking too big for them?
I love that question, because I would almost argue it's easier. I think everyone's wrapped around the axle of we need more resources, right? And again, that's what we were all saying 20 years ago in software engineering. And then you had the mythical man month and all of these various types of management styles, waterfall, extreme, agile, etc. And even different ways to even manage, agile. So I think the big programs can actually get stuck because they're used to doing what they've always been doing, right? And so, just because that CISO position might turn over every 2 years, sure, the leadership changes, but so much of the fundamentals of what the program might have been doing can still be there. And the new CISO might not question it. And just because you are busy doesn't mean you're actually doing the right thing. It doesn't mean you're fulfilled personally and professionally. And so what I would say to a small program, and there's a lot of these right now, right? Companies that are bringing on a CISO for the first time, and they ask questions that the security industry has pushed down their throat, so to speak. Oh, are we a ISO shop or NIST? Or are we going to do CIS? Again, none of that matters. A framework is not a strategy. And you need a strategy for your security program the same way you do for your marketing, your sales, or anything else. And so again, I would go back to those 3 fundamental questions. What are you going to protect? How much do you want to spend? And build a 3-year strategy around the things that are important to those, right? I think what catches smaller institutions is the idea that, we're immature, relative to others in our vertical or other verticals. We're not going to be like, finance or whatever. None of that matters. What matters is that you are doing what's right for your business, and you're protecting, what you have at the level that you can. And that's not a bunch of, you can't just take 200 check boxes and check them all at once. It's not going to happen. So I think prioritizing the fundamentals is always where you start. It's not about, detection, protection, response. It is very much about a fundamental strategy. How much do you want to spend? What do you want to protect? What people are you going to have? What are those people going to be doing? What are the processes they're going to be following? The documentation, the governance, all the boring stuff. Do you understand fundamentally what your controls are? And are those controls actually protecting what you want? And can you tell me, are they actually able to do what you say they do? I mean, it's very, very basic stuff. So all that other stuff, whether it's frameworks or maturity assessments, if those are being used to, as a means to that business result, then great. But those are certainly not a strategy. But if you just take the top first 5 things from the CIS 20 and you focus there, that's a great place to be. You don't start a program by building a SOC. You start a program by having good governance. It may sound not exciting, but fundamentally that's where a program starts. And those first few steps of a security program end up providing way more ROI than the steps 3-5 years down the line. So I think having your most critical things up front, and again, having an actual strategy, not that the CISO or some consultant understands, that the CEO and the board understand. Again, that ability to translate, I think that's what matters.
So at the risk of making you sort of repeat some things, because I think that was a really great comprehensive answer, especially for a lot of small companies and some that are getting started. But if you had to kind of distill it down to maybe the biggest challenge or the biggest gotcha for a company that's just trying to get started, other than just actually getting started, like you said, and seeing that value in the beginning, what's sort of that one thing that you would advise someone, that is getting started for the first time to watch out for, that a lot of companies have been maybe bit on?
Probably their CISO. Again, just because there are so many longtime security practitioners doesn't necessarily mean it's the right fit for your business, right? I mean, Jake, look at how many requirements there still are at the CISO level for the CISP. Going back to your question about technical, right? I fundamentally just don't see that as a primary concern, right? Do you want somebody that understands outdated and aged crypto, or do you want someone that understands how to apply security to a modern business? And that has nothing to do with, the CISP at all. So, I think you have to, again, just break it down to the basics and have a basic conversation with either your current CISO or who you're looking to hire, or how you're looking to build or mature the program, and ensure that the fundamentals are covered. Again, it may not be, exciting, but, having, policies and standards and guidelines and fundamental, governance, especially in a cloud era. Right. I mean, cloud, as the joke goes, is just someone else's computer. That makes governance all that much more important, right? I mean, the whole idea of being elastic, the idea of having a modern DevOps program, makes governance even more critical than it used to be. So, it is very much like the rest of the business, right? You want to be consistent. You want to have decent metrics, and I cannot stress this enough, metrics that are not just technology focused, but operationally focused. Again, that's the way sales, marketing, and engineering might measure themselves. Why anyone in security thinks, we patched this much or we blocked this much malware, those might matter internally. But those are not, what I would consider KPIs that you're going to be talking about with the board, right? You want to be talking about a level of due diligence that is giving them a serious idea of what the security program is able to do, not what it is doing, but what it is able to do from a real defense and protection standpoint, right? So when your back's up against the wall, so to speak, how high are your sandbags, stacked, if you will? That's where you need to be able to get to, because what's missing oftentimes is a common understanding of where you are, and how you're going to get better. And again, sounds very simple, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve on that front. I probably did repeat quite a bit there, Jake, so thanks.
I think it's all good. I think it's things that need to be repeated. All right, we're going to change it up a little bit on you here. I think we talked just briefly before. We were talking about former Uber CISO Joe Sullivan, right? In August, charged with 2 felonies for failing to report a 2016 data breach. So, now we're switching from, smaller companies to larger CISOs, although they have those same sort of issues. But what are your thoughts now on liability, personal liability for CISOs when things go wrong at the company they work for?
It is interesting, and I'm not going to pretend to have followed this as closely as some others. So, I'm certainly no expert on the topic, but a couple, I guess, high level platitudes, if you'll allow me. One, I do like the fact that the CISO is being held more accountable. In the past, and this, the accountability of a CISO has been, well, we just fire them and get another. And you don't. It's just so commonplace that it's, it should be a meme. It probably is. So I like the fact that there's a level of accountability. If the CISO is truly going to be an executive and an officer, and I say that because many people, there's a CISO title, but that, the CISO really isn't, an executive officer of the company in many, many cases. But I think if the CISO is going to be held at a level of accountability that is similar to the officers of that company, then things have to be taken very seriously, right? And so I bring that up mainly because that might be judged very differently depending on the company, right? Just because you have a CISO title doesn't mean that all CISOs are kind of created equally, so to speak. The responsibility might be very different depending. Right, and that I think actually leads to some of the revolving door in that position as well, right? Because it is just really easy to fire and rehire, however, from the CISO's position, those positions can be very, very different. Externally, we might just see, oh, they were a CISO here, now they're a CISO there. But internally, or as it pertains to that particular position, it can be quite different. And I say all that to basically say, you've got to be thinking about that as a CISO, right? When you change jobs or you go into a CISO position for the first time or whatever the case might be, you need to be asking yourself those questions. Am I set up for success? Is the CIO, CEO, whoever, GC, is anyone going to have my back? Do we have is there a good collaborative experience happening here? And I think the number one thing the CISO's got to ask themselves is, have I pushed accountability past myself? And in the case you bring up, certainly that doesn't seem to be the case, right? There was an issue where, things were being, hidden or not communicated properly. So I think it's very important and this goes back to my commentary around the need to translate. You've got to be able to translate, because fundamentally you want accountability past yourself. If you are set up as the fall guy, or you have become the fall guy, part of that is on you as the CISO, because you haven't pushed accountability past yourself. security shouldn't be looked at as, purely an IT function, as it so often is. You are in a position where you need to be discussing risk the same way, your general counsel does, right? And if your company gets sued, you don't just go firing the GC over and over and over again. But that's exactly what we do with CISOs. And so I think my point there is there's a level of responsibility and accountability, I think, on both sides. The company needs to understand that, and so does the person in the position of the CISO.
I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think as being a CISO and talking to a lot of CISOs, knowing that potentially, you may have a short job lifespan, right? What, a couple of years and kind of revolve, because you might be, as you mentioned, the fall guy or girl for an issue. I think most CISOs knew that, but then sort of this personal felony liability stuff, I think that raised a lot of eyes of, well, wait a second. There's been some times as well that I've been told just to thank you for that information, just be quiet. And it's going to be interesting to follow. So with that in mind, what are some, again, more larger security programs, but what are some other commonly maybe overlooked aspects of a security program or from a CISO role that you would say to anyone watching this, you might want to pay attention to or don't overlook?
Oh, I love this question because I think there's quite a few. And it kind of goes again to the formulaic aspect of this industry. Let's call in the big four and get a maturity assessment and then, pat ourselves on the back or cry for more budget. I mean, how many times does that happen over and over and over again? And then we wonder, it just baffles my mind. The CISO position turns over so frequently, and yet we repeat so many of the same, I'll say, mistakes. What I should say, I guess, is behavior, the same behavior, right? What I would say is, in order to be that great translator, you have to, again, understand how high those kind of sandbags are stacked, right? And so that's not saying, oh, we bought this, we deployed it, we implemented it, and we have this level of maturity with it. There are some aspects that I think are commonly overlooked, and again, I think it's because we are so technology focused, and there's still a huge opportunity for the people in process, I think, to elevate and mature. And I think, frankly, that's where a lot of the opportunity is for new innovation, even on the technology front, right? In other words, I'm not playing the typical bash vendors thing here. I'm saying fundamentally shift our thinking, think differently. It's not just about the red blinking lights. We have a ton of events, we have a ton of logs, we have to keep all this stuff, we have to be able to access it, blah, blah, blah. You've got things like control, integration. PCI very much pushed this idea of a compensating control, and those are really useful outside of PCI. What's your backup? Threat intel, as you know, has been big, going on a decade now. Is that actually integrated? It's like these books behind me. What's the use of them if you don't read them, right? So if you've got tons and tons of data, but it's not actually integrated into anything else, right? You've invested, but you're not actually getting any return on that. And so that's kind of what I'm alluding to is you've got to be able to test yourself, right? I mean, a lot of things are done, revisited, quarterly or whatever the case might be. But we often miss just, very simplistic things like, hey, could we improve our control set by making our control set work better together, not adding another control, right? So my point here, I think, Jake, is that what you see in most security programs, I would wager, is that controls generally mirror their control owners, right? The same way a security program might mirror the CISO, right? If the CISO has a history of audit or compliance, or they're a consultant, or like, as I was saying, a former, engineering leader, right? We all have our pros and cons, or what we're good at, gaps, etc. those are the ones you want to be looking at. You don't, yeah, you want to shine the flashlight on what you're good at, but from a leadership standpoint, you've got to understand what you're not good at, and know that internally you should be shining the flashlight on that as well. So I think we look at these silly maturity assessments and we think, oh, well, we're good here, we're not good here. As we all know, right? Attackers don't care, and I think over time, as defenders, we lose that mindset. We get so caught up on the audits and the compliance and the findings that the important things I was mentioning earlier, right? The boring parts, the policies and guidelines, the governance, we might get hung up on that and then forget that what we're really up against is attackers, not paper pushing, right? So it's a balance. I guess my point is there's been many times in my life and career where I've been full of hypocrisy, and I'm sure there's many times I've already been in this discussion. But it's realizing where that happens, when that happens, and being able to realize it and hopefully measure it. And so I think the metrics part is a huge one. Technology metrics are great, but that's easy. Tell me how we're actually functioning day to day. I think that I truly believe that helps prevent burnout. As I mentioned, just because you're busy doesn't mean you're professionally or personally, happy or doing well. So I think it's very important to wake up every morning and, call the baby ugly, so to speak. And, by the time you've made it better at the end of the day, wake up the next day with that same attitude. Complacency absolutely kills insecurity. And so while the fundamentals are very important, you also can't escape the fact that fundamentally you're up against most of the time human adversaries, and they frankly don't care about the things that we typically do in terms of security behaviors.
So what do you look? We've been talking about a lot of things that maybe people could perceive us as being negative about the CISO. And this is hard, and we've said burned out and all that sort of stuff. So for those CISOs that are watching us right now, what do you say to them if they are burned out? What's your quick pep talk, quick words of encouragement for a CISO that's feeling burned out right now and maybe a little hopeless?
It's kind of cheesy. I think goals. You've got to have goals. Again, I would say the rut that so many fall into is because of the typical behavior, right? If you're fighting for dollars, if you're fighting for headcount, if you're just doing the endless whack-a-mole that is security and is likely to not change, those things can lead to frustration. And as I joke, in hockey, not everybody's built to have frozen, however much it weighs, I don't know, however many ounces of frozen rubber is being thrown at a goalie's head. Not everybody's wired for that. Security is similar. Not everybody can just wake up every morning and the internet's on fire and that actually gives them a mission in life. I am wired that way, but I don't think that's common. I don't know that that's healthy. I would say fundamentally, I think more CISOs, in my personal opinion, the operational aspect is very important. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. I would say, more and more CISOs, and I'm saying this based on, over a dozen years of working with, advising, selling to, work, whatever the case might be with CISOs. The operational aspect, I would say, is definitely where a lot of opportunity is right now. Are we doing the right things at the right time? You're always going to be busy. You're always going to have too many things to do. Prioritization is an absolute key fundamental of any leadership. And so a CISO can't be, crying and whining about these things. This is typical. This is what everyone, the VP of sales, the VP of engineering, same thing. CMO, everyone has to deal with these things. You've got to be able to translate to the business so that you can win what you need to better defend. Part of that is being able to tell the business where you're at. Again, a common understanding of where you're at and how you're going to get better. If you can't do that, then you're going to continue to be frustrated. It's that simple.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Dan Holden, Plight of the CISO. Thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed it. Fascinating stuff, and we'll have to do this again. So thanks for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Jake. I can't wait for you to tell me how you might disagree or anyone else out there. So I appreciate any commentary and happy to discuss with anyone.
You just wait for it. Thanks again.
Take care.